Greetings from Maui, and it's nice to be with you all again. I really enjoyed our conversations a couple of years ago when I was able to be on the Big Island. And I love that we can do this, but I do miss seeing your faces directly. What I'd like to do to start out is just take a few deep breaths together, if you will, join me. And as I do this, I'm noticing in my body if there's any tension or holding, any feelings that are there, and I breathe into that place in my body, relax and release. Uh, Coming into the present moment. Okay, good, good. So when I was with you a few years ago, I spoke a bit about my relationship with my guidance and with my girlfriend Mira Rose several years ago. And with all that's going on right now on the planet, with the pandemic, uh, it kind of reminds me of some of the feelings that came up in when 9/11 happened. And I was with Mira. We were in Aspen about a week before 9/11, and we had a gathering. And someone asked about investing in the stock market, and Mira's guidance said, "No, don't go into the stock market right now. In a week, there's going to be a terrorist attack, and the United States is going to be at war, and it's related to the Middle East." And they talked about some of the ramifications of this event and how that was going to affect us. And then during that week, they worked with us and talked to us about how we were going to work with all the feelings that were going to be unleashed by this event, the fear, the sadness. And what they said was not to identify the sadness as our sadness or their sadness, but just the sadness. And that a lot of the suffering that people were going to go through was because they haven't learned how to be with their feelings in an honorable way, in a way that really allowed those feelings to move effectively. And that one way that we could support the collective consciousness was by feeling the feelings and breathing through them and allowing them to move through us. And so then uh, a week later, I went to the TV, and there were the crumbling towers, and I just felt the depth of my sadness, and I took a shower and just cried deeply. And it actually felt like a wonderful release to be able to welcome that energy and to breathe through that and allow that to move through me. And then afterwards, we took a hike with some friends. And during the hike, the guidance came through me, and they were showing me the tarot card of the tower. And the tower is a card that usually is a metaphor for upheaval. And but what they were saying in this case was that uh, the tower, and the tower card, if you haven't seen it, is a long, tall, rectangular tower, and the top of the tower is in flames, and people are falling off the top of the tower, and it looked very much like the Twin Towers. And but what they were saying was that the towers represented the collective value system of our society, which was mostly material based and not based in deeper values of spirit, of love, of connection. And that the crumbling of the towers was actually part of a beneficial process of bringing people toward truer values to be. And then after the towers came down, what we saw was a lot of people coming together in kindness, in caring, in reverence for each other. So that, in fact, did come to pass, that it was part of the process, which may be long. Uh, and I think a lot of the same things may be coming out of this too, that out of difficult times often comes great blessings, great lessons, and bringing us to go deeper within ourselves. And and part of that, I think, also is learning to honor our feelings, and that's been a big part of my process. Several years ago, I had a kayak accident, which I'll tell you about, and a year later, um, a dear friend of mine, Henry, uh, died while kayaking, and he was 35 years old. And at his funeral, I gave the eulogy. And in part of that eulogy, I spoke about this process. And what I said was, in that part, was when I was in the hospital recovering from a shoulder injury sustained while kayaking, Henry was with me every day and shared with me a book about the wisdom of the martial arts. This book reminded me that I had a choice to accept and embrace all that life offers as a gift, that suffering is the result of resisting rather than honoring. From this, I realized that we can also choose to honor the process of our grieving as a gift. As the spring floods release the stagnating waters that are impeded by logs and branches, so the process of allowing the flowing energy of grief removes the armor that builds up over our hearts. These energetic protections and restrictions are created over time as we deny or repress our feelings, our sadness, our fears, and our pain. When released, our lives take on new meaning as we deepen our compassion, our loving, and our personal liberation. I have found that sadness expressed unimpeded is just the flowing of energy. It feels almost like a summer rain that is warm, sweet, and fragrant. As the clouds then clear, we are again able to feel and embrace the sunshine as it caresses our face and warms our soul. So I that's been part of my process is learning to honor grief, uh, to to honor my sadness, to honor all of my feelings. And part of what's helped with that is to be able to notice where it is in my body and to breathe into that place. And sometimes I may, like if I'm angry, I may, feel that in the core of my stomach or frustrated. And what I'll do is breathe into that place and I might give it a sound, let it move, being able to just honor the energy of it without losing myself in the story because the energy is real. It relates to earlier events that may be stored in my body, and and then as there is a flowing, it actually feels wonderful for me, whether it's sadness or whatever, and to be able to, because afterwards it brings me to a state of connection with spirit, with my heart, with being present. So. The kayak accident I spoke about also gave me great lessons. This was in 1996, and I was kayaking a Class 5 rapid, and I went over a waterfall and got stuck in the waterfall and circulated a couple of times, and then I got pushed against a wall, and I was upside down in my boat, and I brought my arms up on the wall, and a friend came to try to help me, and he lost control of his boat, and he came over my back and both my shoulders simultaneously dislocated. And then the boat came back into the rapid, and I was upside down, and I had no feeling in my hands, so I couldn't pull the spray skirt to get out of the boat. And I tried pushing with the my feet off the foot pegs, and the spray skirt wouldn't release. And I realized this is how I'm going to die. And I wasn't afraid. I was just curious about the white light and the tunnel that I had heard about. And I just thought, well, this would be an interesting experience, the whole, death thing. And I was kind of curious and looking forward to it. And then a voice in my head said, try one more time. And I pushed and wriggled, and the spray skirt popped, and I got out of my boat, and it wasn't my time. But that led to an interesting summer because, for one thing, I couldn't do my ordinary sports. My shoulders were dislocated. I had to hold them in two slings like this, and all I could do was walk in nature. And then my wife Joyce was quite upset with me that I was going to die doing these dangerous sports that I was doing, and that I would abandon her. And so she was very angry and distant that summer. And then actually a year later we split up. And then also all of our investments were in four different areas, and in each one there was some sort of funny business or embezzlement, and we ended up losing all our money. And so my body wasn't working, my relationship wasn't working. I had this loss of all of our money, and yet I was in a very peaceful place. And I think it was because I was taking my walks in nature and I was slowing down, and and it really became a wonderful opportunity. And I actually felt quite liberated out of that. That I could lose all of these things and still find my way into a sense of well-being. So that was really a wonderful lesson for me. So just want to breathe in the feeling of that. So I think that first step is about being with our feelings, and sometimes we can transform our belief about our feelings or what's happening and turn it into a productive uh, process. One thing that happened for me later on was they did a test to see if my shoulders, if there was a rotator cuff injury, and what they did is they took this long needle that was very thick and they injected a dye into my shoulder and to see if the dye would leak out and if there was a problem with the capsule in my shoulder. And it's a very painful process. And the doctor who was administering it was a rookie, hadn't done it very much, and he kept missing the capsule and he had to keep doing it over and over. And it was the most excruciating pain that I think I had ever known. And I was thinking about it, and I was thinking, well, what's happening here is that there is this electrical impulse that's coming up into my brain, and my brain is interpreting that as bad, and I'm going into resistance. And what if I decide to reframe, reorient how I see this sensation that's coming to me? And I decided that this was evidence that I was alive, and I came to a place where I was welcoming it uh, as my being alive. And I would, in my mind, I was playing John Denver's song. I want to live. I want to grow. I want to feel. I want to know. And I came into this place of absolute ecstasy where I was welcoming the juice of these sensations. And it was I was crying, the tears were pouring out of my eyes. I was in so much joy, and I'm sure the doctor thought it was because he was inflicting pain on me, but it was actually because I had reoriented my relationship to it. And I realized that our suffering is about our resistance, and it's not about our feelings themselves. And if we can learn to accept and embrace all that is happening, that there's far less suffering. So there's a lot of methods that I've worked with in the seminar that I teach about how it is we can come to a state of connectedness when these difficult feelings are present for us. And I came out with a list, and that you can see that on my website, hleeshapiro.com, in the section under the seminars. And so some of the things I'd like to share with you that I have found to be really helpful to come back into a centered place when I'm out of center, when I'm in fear. So the first thing, though, I think that we need to do is to deal with what's present, and to be able to move that energy, to honor the energy of our feelings. But again, if I can let go of the story initially and just work with what's happening energetically in my body, I find that to be a very important first step, rather than sometimes people will do the spiritual bypass of trying to avoid their feelings. So I think that's really important. And just relaxing those areas of tension in our body. And then exercising, biking, swimming, running, whatever works for you to move the body, move that energy, breathe deeply. When we are in fear, we don't breathe very deeply, or usually we go into contraction. And so, letting that move through these sports or dancing is another wonderful opportunity. Letting the music flow through us and just dance, and let that breathe, let your body move and come to a joyful place. Walking in nature, being in nature is huge, and that's in that story I told you what really connected me, and so going to the beach or getting out in nature in some way, and there's a quality of nature that just resonates with our soul and brings us back to who we are, and so I really love doing that. Meditating. So in meditating, we get quiet. We quiet that voice that is going on all day long and just come to a place of focus with our breath or whatever technique of meditation you like to use and give our mind a rest and just come into a very peaceful place inside. Take a breath with that. Okay. Laughing. I think laughter is so important to bring us into that state of connectedness. And one thing that I've really enjoyed is on YouTube, there's a lot of wonderful videos uh, of, uh, of people laughing or babies laughing or things like that, or just funny things that lighten our soul and lighten our being. And so if we can get into that place of laughter, that helps a lot. Uh, Again, um, exploring the many blessings that we are grateful for, and getting that attitude of gratitude that we've been hearing, speaking about and thinking about, and you all know about that. That when we focus on the things that we're grateful for, instead of telling our story over and over of what victims we are, we we shift that consciousness to a place of gratitude, and then also expressing appreciation for uh, to others, for all that they are in our lives, for our friends, from our hearts, to speak our appreciation. We often don't do that, and it's so important, I think. And so to be able to express that appreciation, and you can see in the person that you're giving appreciation to, when it's from your heart and they receive that, and it's like their aura expands and it comes to a wonderful state of pulling in that love and the gift of that appreciation. So I find that so important. And when I'm in a restaurant or something like that and I feel served, to be able to look at the waitress and the server and just from my heart let them know how much I appreciated their good service, and you can see how much that means to them, and they often don't get that type of feedback. Listening to wonderful music, or watching uplifting movies. There's so much available to us in Netflix and Disney Channel or whatever that can bring us into telling a story that is uplifting and not bringing us down. So I think that can be wonderful. And then music, of course, is just touches our soul so deeply, and so I find that to be really helpful. There's so many great teachers these days that are on YouTube. I love listening to Ram Dass, Eckhart Tolle, Tony Robbins. There's so many great teachers that we can access their wisdom on YouTube, and so that just hearing their words. A lot of times, it's not just their words, but it's the frequency underneath their words that touches our soul and brings us to a clearer understanding of how things are. So yeah, and with Eckhart Tolle, who wrote The Power of Now, of course, and just being in the moment, finding ourselves what's going on right now, because of all of our anxiety is about the future. All of our fears are about the future. They're not about what's happening right now. So if we stop and come into presence in the present moment, that is one of the most important things, I think, that helps me to come into a clearer state of consciousness. Just taking stock of what's happening right now around us. What are the sounds? What am I looking at? And it really helps to bring me into my center and into a really clear state of being. And the fears and anxieties can just drop away. They're not real. They're just a fantasy about the future. Thank you, Eckhart Tolle, for bringing home that message. Uh, being Another thing is being playful, being with a baby or a puppy or a pet, something like that. Often brings me into a really light state of being, and you can just do that in your imagination too. It's if you have a pet, just remember times when your pet comes up to you and licks you on the face, and it's just so much fun and to be able to connect with an animal in that way. So that's another thing we can do. And then I find prayer. And in my prayer, I really just like to invite spirit into my heart to bring me peace. Because that's the bottom line. It's not about our circumstances. It's really about how I am in my heart. Am I in that state of true connection? So when I am in a state of connection, then that brings trust. That brings there's just this incredible sense of well-being. There's a book called Emmanuel's Book. Emmanuel's a disincarnate entity that's channeled. And there's a part in there where he says that when we're in a state of fear, that we try to find guarantees that we won't have certain feelings in the future. And the irony is that from that place of fear, there never are enough guarantees to bring us peace. But if we can somehow shift our consciousness into a place where we are connected in our hearts, in our love, in the essence of our being, that from that place, no guarantees are necessary. So I think that that's a very wise understanding also. Also, sometimes we may not be able to be in a peaceful place. And so one thing we can do is just in our imagination, we can go to a peaceful place or a peaceful memory and just bring that place into our consciousness in the moment, or a time when we felt really joyful, or a time when we felt mastery. Several years ago, I did a lot of ski racing, and one of my buddies that I was ski racing with said, when you're on the lift, think about a time when you felt mastery. And I would remember when I was on the lift, I would remember times when I was painting, and that boy, just the juices were flowing through me, and that creative process was happening, and I was doing this marvelous painting, and it brought me into this great state. And what I noticed is that my skiing got better. And so, if you can imagine, remember the time when you felt, uh, that place of mastery, that will translate and into whatever it is you're trying to do and bring you into a great state. So just being quiet sometimes and also eating healthy foods or fasting can be really helpful. Doing stretching or yoga, helps move the body, and there's that flowing of energy that can happen when we loosen get ourselves loosened up and do that. Practicing martial arts, qigong, tai chi, things like that. Also, is that movement, that gentle movement that helps bring us into a clear and centered state. Imagining or visualizing what would be the sweetest possibility. A lot of times in our fantasies, we go into negative fantasies about what negatively might happen, but instead, just try to visualize and see what's the sweetest possibility that can come out of this. And I think that also helps. Instead of a negative fantasy, it brings me into a positive fantasy of what can happen, and so that feels great. Doing acts of service, going into kindness and asking what is really loving in this moment. In fact, I think that that's a really important thing that I like to do is just get quiet inside and ask what is truly loving in this moment? What is a loving action I can take? And then not just answering from the mental mind, but waiting for that clear, inspired answer of finding what has that frequency of love? What is it I can do in this moment? And as I take really good care of myself and do what is loving, that I find that magical things can happen. and it creates a sense of trust inside that I'm going to do that. Another thing is forgiving ourselves and forgiving others, which is about accepting that our own humanness. And I think that's something that's really important in this process is that, we're not going to do it perfectly every time. We are human, and but we can do the best we can, and to accept that our humanness and accept that we're learning. These are all lessons that we're learning about, and and honor our mistakes. Just bring us closer to doing it better and better. You know. One thing that Ram Dass said once that I really loved is he said that after all these years of psychotherapy and spiritual practice, he said, but basically I have the same neuroses I came in with. But what's changed is I'm no longer identified with them. And so I loved that he came into accepting his own humanness and his own neuroses. But there was a place he was watching and witnessing from that was not identified with those neuroses. And somehow that made it all very playful and very okay. And that's one thing I loved about Ram Dass is he was so playful about sharing about his ego and his adventures with that his mistakes and things like that. So another thing I love to do is go to empowering affirmations, writing or saying empowering affirmations. And one of my favorite ones is at any moment and under any circumstance, I have the ability to open my heart to spirit and experience peace. So if you'd like to say that for yourselves with me, at any moment and under any circumstance, I have the ability to open my heart to spirit and experience peace. Good. And with that understanding, I wish you all peace at this time and all times. Aloha.